The Hall of Fame game is done and in the books. Let's talk about all of the things that we learned. What is going on, guys? Welcome back to Talking Jets with Tigo. My name is Tigo, and today we're going to be talking about all of the things that we learned during the Hall of Fame game. But before we hop into that real quick, if you guys haven't hit the subscribe button, make sure to hit it. 50% of you guys aren't subscribed, and it really helps the channel a lot if you hit the subscribe button. But let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about the game, and we're going to start talking about special teams, then the offense, then the defense, because we do have to talk about the special teams, which was absolutely phenomenal today in the preseason game. One of the biggest things that I was paying attention to was who was playing and who was doing what on special teams and at what positions. I've talked about this before, and I'll continue hounding this message that this year, this offseason, and this decision for the 53-man roster is so important for the New York Jets, and we need to be making sure that everybody on the 53-man roster can provide a positive value to the team in more areas than one, or be an exceptionally positive player in the aspect that they do play in. So, for example, I don't expect Garrett Wilson to be a positive player on special teams, but I do expect him to be a very, very good player on the offense, so that kind of excuses him. But a guy like Brandon Echols, who, yes, can be a positive for the defense, also needs to be a positive in specials, because cornerback 4 and 5 need to be providing value to this team beyond just being a backup. And that's exactly what we saw today from a lot of guys. Javelin Guidry, Brandon Echols, Zaire Barnes, Michael Clemens, so many different, Jason Brownlee, so many different players being able to show the ability to be able to play on special teams as well on the offense and defensive side of the ball if they need to. That's a great look for the New York Jets. The other thing that we have to talk about was Greg the Leg. Greg Zuerlein was absolutely automatic. 4 kicks today, 3 field goals, and 1 extra point. 44, 52, and 54 yards from the field goal, up the middle every single time. And boy, does it feel good knowing that we don't have to worry about kicker at all this season. And that's such a good feeling for the New York Jets to know, hey, we're okay at kicker. But I could say the same thing about Thomas Morstead with the punting game. He did such an exceptional job. Our offense had a really hard time going, so Thomas Morstead was asked to punt a bunch. He punted 5 times today, and 246 punt yards, 49.2 average yardage per punt. It was just phenomenal from him. It gave our special teams unit the opportunity, by keeping the ball in the air for so long, it gave our special teams unit the opportunity to sprint down the field and make the play and stop the players inside of the 20, which he did 3 times on his 5 punts. Phenomenal play from Thomas Morstead. Loved what I saw from the special teams. Now let's talk about the offense. And before we talk about any of the players that were on the field, I think we need to talk about, more importantly, one of the players who wasn't on the field, and one of the players that didn't dress, and what implications that might mean to their spot on the roster. And that's fullback Nick Bawden, who was there. I saw him, but he didn't dress. And he's totally healthy. Now, what does that mean? I think that means that maybe Tigo was right. For those of you who are subscribed to the Buffalo Jet fan channel, which is probably all of you, because you should be subscribed to the Buffalo Jet fan channel, probably saw that he and I did a top 25 current Jets player on the roster. And I had the expectation of putting Nick Bawden on the top 25, and I had him way too high by an error of my own. That being said, I did want to have him in the top 25 because I think that he is one of the better New York Jet players. And I think that Nathaniel Hackett and this coaching staff would agree. I think that the 53-man roster is going to have Nick Bawden on it. And by them not dressing him, keeping him off so that he ultimately stays healthy, is very telling about what they think about him and his ability on the football team. Now let's talk about the offense, which did struggle, but we saw some really, really nice things from some players on the offensive side of the ball. Let's start by talking about Zach Wilson, who had a really good day for himself out there. 3 for 5, 65 yards, 13 yards per attempt. Really, really nice. Capitalized by a 57-yard bomb to Malik Taylor, which was just absolutely phenomenal. And we got to see the growth in Zach Wilson's game, going through his progressions, sitting in the pocket and then stepping into the pocket. And then once that all happens and really sitting there and letting the play develop, does a play break down? Is he going to go in to do what we know Zach Wilson can do, which is, spin it around and take it up the field? And we would have seen more of Zach Wilson and some of these other players if, he didn't slip there and he gets that first down and we didn't just get, 2 series out of our quarterback in that situation. But it is promising signs from Zach Wilson. The time with Aaron Rodgers does show growth. Becton also played today. He played 7 offensive snaps and then a bunch of special team snaps all night. And again, I think we would have seen more of Mekhi Becton if the offense didn't just do 2 series in the first quarter. I never expected them to play beyond the first quarter. These are guys that have big potential of being big parts of this team moving forward, especially this year. Zach Wilson is the primary backup. Mekhi Becton probably still competing for a starting job. And so the failure of the offense to get going, specifically in the run game, and we'll talk about that in a second, is really what hindered these 2 guys' ability to play more snaps, especially when we have to look at Tim Boyle and Chris Streveler, who were absolutely abysmal, and this is why we needed to see them. I think that the New York Jets would be well served if they went out of their way to go out and try to find a QB3 out in the market. With the new QB3 rule, being able to carry one for free, we saw today Tim Boyle, Chris Streveler are absolutely horrific. They're not good enough to be QB3, and there are guys out there who I think are good enough to be quarterback 3 and can win that job and do that job successfully. The New York Jets should be in the quarterback market for a QB3, especially with being able to carry one for free with the new rule on the 53-man roster. But the running game really, really struggled today, and we saw that with the teams not being able to get anything going. Outside of the Israel Abanikanda rushing touchdown, which was absolutely phenomenal by him, showing off his wheels, beating the defender to the corner by just, boom, getting there and he's just insanely fast. And we saw that phenomenal play from him, but everybody else struggling. Travis Dye with 9 carries for 12 yards. Damari Crockett with 4 carries for 7 yards. Chris Streveler with 1 carry for 7 yards. Not a good look from any of the running backs, and that all came from the offensive line. The offensive line struggled in the run game. Once Mekhi Becton came out, they placed Carter Warren in there, and Carter Warren looked unpolished. And that's exactly what we expected from him. And we saw enough from Carter Warren to really be optimistic. I liked what I saw from Carter Warren, but he is unpolished. And hopefully Carter Warren is going to get what we all wanted Max Mitchell to get last year, which is a true redshirt year. Carter Warren, one, should not dress for a single football game this year, if we're being honest, and should be given the opportunity to sit, learn, and develop, and really compete for a spot next year, because that's what I think is going to happen with him. But we saw from this offensive line that we're having a hard time creating push. One of the things that we talked about with Joe Tippmann when he was coming in, he's really, really big for a center, and we're starting to see why he isn't getting reps with the ones, because he's so big at 6'6", he's having a hard time getting low enough to win in the run game. And Max Mitchell, who played at right tackle for the beginning of the game before getting subbed out, also seemed to be having a hard time moving around his new weight. Remember that this offseason, Max Mitchell put on almost 15 pounds of muscle and is playing at a new body weight. And you can tell that he was much, much stronger in the past than he was last year, but also seemed to be a little bit slow getting into his spots in the run game, which is definitely something that he's going to have to work on this offseason. But the offensive line absolutely struggled mightily and was letting pressure in from 3s and 4s, and that's a little bit of a concern. But that was really it. Outside of that, we got a lot of good looks from a lot of the guys on the offense. Israel Abanikanda, Malik Taylor, Jason Brownlee, Kenny Yeboah, Gibson also with some really good looks. He struggled and bobbled his first touch at the beginning of the game and then came back and started looking really good and doing some really nice things from Xavier Gibson. But again, a lot of good looks from the guys that are going to be the bottom half of the roster, which is what we wanted to see. But now let's talk about defense. And another thing that we're going to start talking about the defense is, more importantly, players that didn't dress, and that's Tony Adams. Tony Adams, I think, has secured his spot as the starting free safety for this football team, and it's not even a question. I think it's going to be Tony Adams for sure, no matter what. It's him, and I think that I'm able to double down on that take because of the fact that they just didn't dress him because they didn't want to hurt him, just like they did with all of the other starters, and he's on that list, which is just absolutely phenomenal. But one of the things that I'm going to lead this off, we normally tend to go, defensive line, linebackers, secondary. I'm going to start with the linebackers because, boy, were the linebackers absolutely flying. It really, really sucks that Hamza Nasruddin went down after only playing 2 plays, because I think he legitimately lost his job from players who were playing on that day. Chaz Surratt, Jamie Sherwood, Zaire Barnes, all playing exceptionally well. Now, to be fair, they're playing against 2s and 3s, but still, they're 2s and 3s, except for Jamie and Sherwood. They're playing against their caliber of player, and they dominated. They were right around the ball every time they needed to be. They were sure tacklers, and we saw that from Chaz Surratt and Zaire Barnes, forcing the fumble and doing all of the good things that we need from our linebacker play. The New York Jets have depth at linebacker, and that's absolutely phenomenal to see. And now we can see why they weren't ever in the Quan Alexander race. They believe in Surratt, Barnes, and most importantly, Sherwood. Now let's talk about the secondary. We're going to talk about Brandon Echols. Brandon Echols is absolutely a dog, but a lot of stupid mistakes from Brandon Echols today, and he needs to shore that up. We know that he's going to be suspended week 1, which is fine, but you can't be giving up this many penalties. A lot of penalties today from the Jets on the offense and defensive side of the ball. Doesn't change the fact that while Brandon Echols is absolutely a dog everywhere in the run game, is a sure tackler, doing all those things right, needs to fix the penalty issue, because I think he has a legitimate shot of being the number 1 backup outside corner for the New York Jets this year. And while I feel comfortable with that, I would feel much more comfortable if he wasn't a penalty machine. Another player in the secondary that got a ton of work inside, outside, on special teams is Javelin Guidry. Javelin Guidry right now slots in as the only player on the team who can play as a backup nickel, and we need that with Tony Adams, who used to be the backup nickel, now being the starting free safety. So I think Guidry definitely is going to make this team and showed a ton of versatility. Also, Craig James had one hell of a day. We've seen him really, really compete to push for that bottom half of the roster spot. Cornerback 5 and cornerback 6 are going to be an incredibly difficult decision with some of these players playing so well. And Bryce Hall, man, it's crazy how it almost seems like every time Bryce Hall steps onto the field, he gets worse. It's insane what's happening with Bryce Hall, who used to be a starter, and now I can't even trust when he gets onto the field against 2s and 3s. I don't know his fate, but he doesn't seem slated to be a New York Jet very long, especially at a $3 million, with the trade deadline being a true trade deadline where you can go out and acquire team players and you can go out and acquire guys. Having as much cap space as possible helps. And if Bryce Hall keeps playing the way that he's playing, and guys like Craig James and Brandon Echols and Javelin Guidry keep playing the way that they're playing, it's going to be hard to find a spot for Bryce Hall. And that sucks because he's 2 years removed from being a pretty good starter. Now let's talk about Trey Dean. We're going to talk about Ashton Davis first, actually, because I think Trey Dean just took Ashton Davis's job. Ashton Davis was in peak midseason form, whiffing on a tackle by what seemed like 20 yards. Absolutely insane. It's hard for me to find a place on Ashton Davis for this team. He used to be a special team stud, but with all of these guys that are appearing on this team, playing a special teams so exceptionally well, it's hard for me to say that Ashton Davis is going to make this team, which sucks because I was an Ashton Davis believer. And Trey Dean, oh my gosh. 8 tackles today, leading the defense by far and away by at least 2 or 3 tackles, 7 of which were solo tackles. The guy was everywhere and is a tackling machine. Trey Dean is the reason that we cut Will Parks, because Trey Dean slots in to be a perfect Will Parks replacement, but I think that he's going to go even further. He is the perfect Ashton Davis replacement, can play special teams. We saw that from him tonight, and man, does he not miss a tackle. I love Trey Dean. I said this when we signed him as an undrafted free agent. Boy, is he good. I also forgot to mention this when we were talking about the linebackers, but I should mention him, and that is Claudin Cherilus, undrafted free agent linebacker. Making some plays, man. Number 41, he was out there and you could see him. And that's the thing. When you're playing these preseason games, it's about the guys that you notice, right? That's when you get your opportunity to be noticed. And I definitely noticed 41 when he was out there making tackles, making his moves, doing all of those things. But now let's talk about the defensive line. The interior defensive line needs help. We rested all of our interior defensive linemen, and we saw that from the fact that our interior defensive line could not create any type of pressure at all, and that is worrying. But we got to see a lot of our good guys on the defensive line, and this is absolutely an insane stat from Connor Hughes per NFL Next Gen Stats. Will McDonald's average get off on his pass rushes tonight has been 0.91 seconds. Jermaine Johnson's was 0.79, and Bryce Huff's was an absolutely absurd 0.68, which is just insane. Our edge players, and Michael Clemens doesn't have a great get-off, but he bullied so many tackles to where he almost got a couple of sacks just purely by throwing the tackle at the quarterback. He is that strong. He has got a huge body, and Michael Clemens played exceptionally well. So did Will McDonald with a nasty spin move that we saw from him. Jermaine Johnson absolutely bullying the tackles that were in front of him. And then Bryce Huff just being Bryce Huff. The one thing that I will say is that Bryce Huff played really, really late into the fourth quarter, which is kind of disappointing because you would have hoped that the New York Jets would have pulled him sooner, but I think it's more telling of where he falls on the depth chart for the New York Jets and what their belief and what they believe his role is. And it sucks because Bryce Huff is such an explosive player on third downs, and it really, really sucks that he struggles in the run game so heavily, and we saw some of that tonight. It sucks that he doesn't have that skill set, because imagine if he did. For example, Will McDonald with a phenomenal get-off and like just getting to the backfield and creating pressure, but also cheating inside in downs where he thought and believed that runs were coming, and he was right, and just being a net positive in the run game and doing all of those things. I wish that Bryce Huff had that skill and ability, but we can tell why Will McDonald went in the first round and Bryce Huff went undrafted. It's because Bryce Huff, as of right now, seems to be lacking that skill set. But ultimately, that's everything that I saw from the game that we just witnessed, the Hall of Fame game yesterday. Let me know of what players stood out to you. Who are you most excited to see as the season and the preseason moves on? Let me know all of that stuff in the comment section below. And last but not least, go Jets.